Michael, Ines, it's nice for us all to be on camera together.
G'day, Jay.
Hi, Michael. So on this video, I wanted to ask you both a bit about where you started in immigration and if you sort of fell into it, or what actually happened for the viewers.
Okay, well, I actually did really fall into it. I used to work for the Department of Immigration and I used to do that border security. So I used to cancel their visas, put them in detention, listen to the stories and all sorts of things. And I actually became a registered migration as a ticket out of the Australian Public Service.
Oh, wow. So you kind of fell into it there
I totally did.
and you saw both sides of it there.
I actually have seen both sides, and as a result of that, it actually, I think, gives me quite a unique perspective.
I agree. Definitely. What about you, Ines?
I also fell into it. I started in criminal law, criminal defense, and it was the day that somebody said that they did something, and that was the day I walked out. And a friend of mine said, "Hey, there's a grad intake at this firm." So that's when I literally fell into it. Stayed there for I don't know quite some time as well, and then it's been immigration ever since for me. Yeah.
Okay, so you both fell into it. I'll speak to my experience. I fell into it in the immigration space, not as a loyal agent, but through my relationship with you, Ines, where coming up to 8 years ago next month, we decided to start a firm together, me with my business perspective, let's just say, and you with obviously your substantial legal perspective. And here we are 8 years, 8 years later. So, Michael, what languages do you speak?
Well, I speak English very, very well, but I've also got experience. I'm reasonably okay at French and German. I studied Arabic, as you know, in Yemen and Syria. That's in the back of my head, but it comes back if I'm in an Arabic speaking environment. And then I guess you can throw in a bit of Italian, Danish, and Ethiopian,
Oh,
as you do.
as you do. All right, Ines, sort of like
Didn't you have no, I can't. But didn't you have a consultation with someone you spoke German to? And they
Oh,
were,
that's right.
Lord.
That's right. A client came from Germany. Her English was pretty good, but it was a stressful consultation. And hey, presto,
yeah.
ich habe Deutsch gesprochen.
I've also been part of consultations with you, Michael, where you will be quizzing somebody about where they live in Iran, and the person in Australia has no clue. You know more about it than they do.
It's true. I am a bit of a geopolitics geek. And look, I've traveled a lot. And so basically, I can kind of guess where people are from simply from their name and the country.
That's a lot of experience. So, Ines, what about you? Tell us about your languages.
So I was born in Bosnia, so obviously speak Bosnian and all the languages of the region.
So what would that be? That would be like,
Croatian, Serbian.
Yeah.
Macedonian's hard, but I can. Bulgarian's even harder, but yeah, I can understand all of those lovely people.
Okay. I speak English. My mother failed me. Sorry, Mum, if you're watching this. You didn't teach me Hindi. Unfortunately, all my cousins know Hindi. We've got this mismatch in our house where we will use Hindi words, Bosnian words, but unfortunately I don't. Luckily, we do have a practitioner who does speak Hindi, so serving those clients. So, Michael, I wanted to ask you this. How did you become the complex case specialist?
I think that's really interesting because I realize now that a couple of my party tricks are that I enjoy solving puzzles and I enjoy getting to the bottom of things. And I like seeing relationships between elements which other people might see as quite diffuse.
Yeah.
So it's all about problem solving for me.
Yeah. So that's how you became the complex case specialist.
I guess so. It's a really great name. So thank you, Jay.
It is. Well, it's interesting for me because, we employ other practitioners and there's people who've been in the field for sometimes more years than you, Michael, but haven't dealt with the breadth of different matters, and especially now as we're dealing with more and more complicated matters, whether it's custody, whether it's Villawood, whether it's really complicated business structures, you seem to be very aware of a lot of it.
Look, I think it's also because I'm quite a curious person.
Yeah.
So I'm quite at home reading the Financial Review as I am reading about the history of medieval Romania. So it's all about being interested in things in general.
Definitely. So, Ines, tell us about your areas of interest. Like, what actually do you like, in immigration? What's the thing that you're finding interesting to you?
Interesting. My favorite cases are the cases of Michael
What makes them favorite for you?
because I learned so much. I learned so much. Such a hoot. I'm like, what do you mean? Oh, okay. And listening and learning from Michael, very interesting. And the way he works with people and the way his brain thinks. I think because I've done corporate immigration for so long, I have a sort of a different mindset. Oh, well, the risk profile, we have to get it approved. Whereas the cases we do is completely different. The risk of not going well is higher, but it's the questions, it's the evidence, it's the way that you work at it that is relevant to all areas of immigration law. So that's the most interesting thing for me.
But I
And
can
we're working together. Sorry. And working together,
I agree. Ines and I have a unique working relationship.
Mm.
And Ines, you say that you obtain perspectives from me, but the same goes for me from you. So I think together we provide a unique ability to solve problems and get things through.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, for sure.
I also think what you two might not realize, because I get a lot of people applying for jobs at Rocket and Ash. They'll contact me on LinkedIn and say, hey, yeah, I know. And they'll say, I'm a solicitor. I've got X amount of years experience. And it's always interesting for me because, there's people who have been in the immigration space for 5 or 10 years, but have only done such a small subset. And then when you put them into a practice like ours, where it is quite wide with different practitioners doing different things, it's like they're a graduate with basically no knowledge. And it then becomes this really interesting thing because they want to be compensated as someone who's got 10 years experience, but in a wide immigration law perspective, they've only got a very small subset of information. And I've come to observe that there are corporate immigration law firms or law firms that only do one type of thing, like 482 186s, and that's their whole practice. So yeah, it's interesting for me to observe the two of you in the breadth of knowledge. What do you like about Rocket and Ash? We're coming up to 8 years, Michael. So I want to get your perspective. You've been with us, I think, coming up to a year soon, maybe
Soonish.
soonish.
More emphasis on the ish.
Yeah, not that. Yeah.
Oh, Rocket and Ash. Well, it's unique. And you can see, look at the three of us. Yeah. We all look completely different. We all have very different backgrounds, and we all bring something very specific and unique to the table. And this combination, frankly, I haven't enjoyed myself as much as I have been with you and Ines.
Oh, that's
I
fantastic.
think I'm going to cry.
Me too.
That's great. All right, so Ines, I suppose we did another video with you talking about Rocket and Ash because we're coming up to obviously the 8 years. I suppose, Michael, let me ask you, what excites you moving forward? What type of stuff do you like taking on? Because people are going to be watching this who are in difficult situations.
Okay, I always go back to the fact that I enjoy solving problems and getting to the bottom of things. As you know, I undertook a significant interview with a client yesterday,
Yep.
and I really got to the bottom of why certain things happened in that person's life.
Yeah.
And once I get to that stage of understanding, I feel completely zen.
Yeah. What about you, Ines? What sort of practice areas do you look forward to expanding into or doing?
Look, I like doing what I know, and so there's an area of that, and I like doing what we do together, Michael and I. Partner and I will do different types of things, but it's the most exciting stuff is the crazy stuff. And I wouldn't have thought to say that, but I can only say that within the context of the knowledge that you have and that I'm building upon, which is really exciting. So, what about you? Yeah.
I suppose I find that, like Michael, the problem solving part of this work is fascinating to me. While I'm often on the front line of interacting with a client to figure out, like, when they book in a free conversation with us and then it comes to me, like, what is their problem? And I'll spend 10 or 15, sometimes even 20 minutes just getting to what is it actually that we have to do? What's the scope of service that eventually I'm going to be coming to the two of you about?
Or what happened?
What happened? And there's so many layers of it. I find that this complicated area and also the sense of justice, I feel like at times people have been dealt a bad hand in life. They get caught up in a negative environment or system, and then they've attempted to turn their life around and they just need some support from us. I find those things particularly interesting. And I think with Rocket and Ash, we've the market where things just get lodged and they kind of get left alone. For our law firm hasn't existed for a long time, if ever.
Yeah.
I think there is a segment of the immigration space that does that type of work that we just simply don't do. Even our less complicated matters, I'm sure you would consider is quite complicated
Well,
still.
no, everybody's lawful, so it's fine. It's when they become unlawful, Michael.
I love unlawful.
Yeah. And I think, Michael, it's an interesting thing because the opposition leader, the Honourable Angus Taylor, talked about 65,000 people who are unlawful in this country who, we did that TikTok, which I think has got 1 million views now, called booting out. You and I laughing because he used the term, we're going to boot them out, as this sort of way of driving almost interest in the area. But the reality is that there's a whole bunch of people in that cohort who actually are probably reasonable people in a bad situation who need professional support, and you can't necessarily just boot them out. There is a formal process of law that must take place.
Correct.
So before we sort of finish up, is there any immigration related updates that you guys want to talk about? Any interesting cases or anything that the general public, whoever's watching this, should be aware of?
Yeah, I'd like to say that the way that immigration is portrayed in the media is as a homogenous thing, and it's totally not. So when it's talked about immigration, yeah, it's whether it is like humanitarian, that is refugees, whether it is skilled migration, whether it is employer migration, whether it is family migration, whether it is points migration, and students. And all of these things are very different animals under the umbrella of immigration.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I think that reporting on the ISIS brides was interesting. I actually shot that with a partner, and it was this thing about, when people are citizens, they get certain rights. So the same thing that, I enjoy as an Australian citizen, they got to enjoy also. And a lot of people found that really hard to stomach, which was somebody's done what's perceived as a really bad thing. And then how can they be allowed to come back in? But again, we're in a place where there is a rule of law.
Yeah, and people forget that given that the ISIS brides were Australian citizens and had the right to come back to Australia under current law, that the fact that they might have committed, or they, as indicated, crimes against humanity is still significant. So that process of law will still carry out, irrespective of their Australian citizenship.
Yeah. I think there's one thing I would like to just talk to you about, which is I'm noticing that there's, in the budget papers last week, they talk about more New Zealand citizens coming to Australia. I think the previous Prime Minister is now living in Sydney. I've been at parties with a number of New Zealand people, some of them who are well known, and they're all talking about, moving to Australia or wanting to stay in Australia. We've started to see a cohort of New Zealand people who, for some reason, don't get citizenship in Australia. Is there any perspective that you guys have about that? And should they become citizens? Should they just leave it alone?
Yes, well, the Trans-Tasman Agreement exists, and a couple of years laws and regulations were changed such that New Zealand citizens that hold the subclass 444 visa could become permanent residents and citizens more easily, as was the case for Australians who went to New Zealand. Of course, the issue is that far more New Zealanders come to Australia than Australians go to New Zealand. Look, the reality is it's not that different to the EU, when Eastern European countries became part of the EU, many people went from Eastern European countries to Western European countries for economic reasons. And guess what? It's not that different between Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah, for sure. All right, are we done, guys? Anything else?
No, I wanted to ask Michael's perspective on the budget with regards to the ART and protection visas and the duty lawyer that they're going to have in Melbourne and Sydney. We don't know the extent of it, but I'm really interested to see, because as of right now, people can go to the federal court. Their matter's been refused with the department. The ART has agreed, and then they get no legal representation generally, or somebody tells them they're self-represented, and then they submit it and they sit on a bridging visa for years and years. Now they're looking at making that more tighter, I suppose. It's not clear what they'll do, but I find it to be very interesting. I'd like to see how it transpires. Would it be legal aid? There'll be a duty lawyer, or they'll allocate it to certain firms. Whatever they'll do, and how that will impact the person.
Okay. Well, I think it is very interesting, and I think it's probably a necessary step given the abuse of the judicial system in relation to decisions that come from the Administrative Review Tribunal. And look, having a duty lawyer, it's probable that certain firms will get the contract to supply lawyers into that position, yeah? And now whether those lawyers then have some kind of privilege in terms of signing off on a matter, yeah, or not signing off on a matter remains to be seen. But I think that the persons who have a protection visa, where the decision's been affirmed by the tribunal, having that correct advice, I think, is very beneficial.
Yeah.